With the synopsis out of the way, I have, of course, let my hair down for the proverbial teardown. Hair down for the teardown. I'm making it a thing. In which I will fulfill my legal obligation to point out every little problem I have with The Predator. What's this? Oh shit, a cool iron-on decal. I gotta try this.
A few minutes later.
Okay, so I feel like a broken record at this point, but seriously, why is this book called The Predator? No Schwarzenegger, no Action Jackson, no Jesse the Body Ventura, no invisible vagina monsters. Marco doesn't even make a casual meta-reference to the classic 1987 film. Get to the chopper! Seriously though, obviously I know that Predator had a meaning well before Josh McTiernan got his hands on the word, but I really can't think of a single relationship between any characters or groups of characters that I would describe as particularly predatory as specific to this book. I mean, sure, the Yeerks prey on the humans. One could argue that the Animorphs are preying on the Yeerks, but that happens in every Animorphs book. There's nothing specific about this story that fits that title. Now, I know I make this point a lot, but this time I'm ready to put my money where my mouth is. Here's a brief list of ideas for titles that would be more appropriate. On page 3, the word dumpster is capitalized, which seems like a really nitpicky thing to point out, but I actually looked into it. While dumpster is a genericized trademark nowadays, the name of the all-too-familiar green trash repositories was once a snappy brand name, originally a portmanteau of Dempster Dumpmaster. It's not super interesting, but hey, learn something new every day. When the team is heading out to meet Axe in the woods for the first time, Marco's narration explicitly describes Cassie as a little short black girl. Now, it's not really important, but it's also interesting to note that this is the first time that she's been referred to as black in the actual text. I mean, obviously, the cover illustrations give us a pretty good idea of how K. Applegate was picturing these main characters, but, just a note. How do Andalites eat? Marco points out on page 19 that no one had actually bothered to ask Axe yet how his species eats with no mouth. Now, I actually remember from way back when I read the first 2/3 of the series the first time, but Marco wonders it quietly to himself as they're going to meet Axe at the beginning. And I really appreciate little moments like that. At least someone is asking the technical questions, if only in his head. When they're at the mall, Jake spots Axe over at the Starbucks, and then feels the need to further clarify to Marco, the coffee place. Quaint. Okay, so that whole fiasco at the mall. Where do I even freaking start? I mean, taking Axe to the mall in the first place was a huge risk, but I get it, it was necessary. Axe losing his mind after experiencing the joys that are taste and smell for the first time. Who's to judge? It's sort of like the alien equivalent of finishing off the rest of the six-pack after your first taste of Mike's Hard Lemonade that 4th of July when I was 19. I can even let it slide that Axe starts demorphing before they're actually out of the mall. I don't know for sure how much time was left on the clock. But what really gets me is that there are 45 books after this book. Now, I know it was the 90s, but am I really supposed to believe that this mall has no security cameras? Nor the parking lot? Nor the grocery store? I mean, how is there not literal footage somewhere of Jake and Marco transforming into lobsters? I know I've talked about this a lot before, and I don't expect the Animorphs to get notably cleverer anytime soon. But seriously, how could the Yeerks not glean anything useful from this debacle? In the past, I've laid the suspension of disbelief mostly on the Animorphs, but in this case, if the alien invaders can't figure something out here, I'm at the point where it's getting really hard to consider them threatening as an invading force. Yeah, spoilers, they don't. Related, but definitely pickier. When Jake, Marco, and Axe are lobsters, Marco describes his two instincts as kill and eat. Well, I totally get the eat bit. Aren't lobsters scavengers? I can look that up. http://www.wikipedia.wik is it another I? Oh, that's right. Wikipedia says they prefer live prey. My mistake. Now I learned two things. Also, Marco refers to his lobster morph swimmerettes as swimmerettes. Which I can't take any major issue with because it is technically correct. The best kind of correct. But seeing as how I literally had no knowledge of that word before rereading this, it's not unreasonable to find it a little odd that a 14-year-old is familiar with the term. I mean, maybe he looked it up before writing the memoir. And then he uses cuticle to describe the shell. Again, technically correct, but why wouldn't a high school freshman just say shell, or exoskeleton, or maybe even chitin? Starting to think Marco might be a secret genius. And then, of course, he describes the 8 lobster legs as bursting out of his chest. I mean, I assume his arms are becoming the claws, but using that logic, wouldn't it be reasonable to think that maybe his legs would become one of the pairs of legs? Seriously, I'm drifting here, because there's nothing technically wrong at all. Feels weird, man. In a similar vein to that Cassie speech from before, Marco's description of his mother is the first time that he's referred to as Hispanic. Again, not really important, but still interesting, especially considering how wonky some of these early cover illustrations are. At one point, when Marco is rattling off a list of all the animals he's been, he mentions the osprey, which is fine, and I think that anyone who follows this shit would agree. But he does not mention a bald eagle, which is also fine, but it definitely furthers my belief that K.A. did not check her notes when writing that final encounter in, well, the book of the same name. Okay. It's been 5 books. It is finally time to point out that with maybe the exception of the dolphins from the last book, nobody has had the wisdom to propose, hey, why don't we try out this potentially volatile new morph before? It could be potentially life-threatening. You know, just to sort of get familiar with the instincts. Ants seem like the perfect example of a creature that you want to experience before it's a life-or-death situation. Then again, it did not occur to Cassie, of all people, that morphing a colonizing insect might be a nightmare. Still hope they figure this shit out soon. Boy, it sure is lucky how the first path into the Chapman house that our ant friends find happens to lead to the exact, supposedly super secure room for which they are looking. I mean, it's not impossible, but... Speaking of, they explicitly mention Marco feeling around in the dark for a light switch, but then they explicitly don't mention him turning the damn thing off when they leave. Amateur hour. Though, actually, that could be what alerted Chapman to check his transponders. Which could be what alerted him that one was missing. Which could have given the Yeerks a hint as to their plan. That may explain something I haven't nitpicked yet, but it still seems awfully convenient, doesn't it? Now, I apologize in advance for this next bit, but if you have not yet figured out that I am a cynic, that's on you. It's admittedly dark, but I confess that when Marco said, "A year from now, I don't want my father going to leave flowers on 2 graves," my first thought was not, "Don't worry, Marco, it's only book 5. You've got plot armor." It was, "Don't worry, Marco, he'll probably have killed himself long before then." Oh, come on, I owned it, shut up, come on. I don't know shit about how beacons designed by aliens to summon the spacecraft of other aliens work, but I feel like that bug fighter showed up way too quickly. Of course, its expediency could suggest that the Yeerks anticipated their plan, and of course, as I mentioned before, the left-on light could have compelled Chapman to analyze his computer and realize that it was missing one of its Z-space transponders, and that could indicate that the Andalites were planning something that required a Z-space transponder. I buy that, but it also brings me to my next point. Refreshing as it was to see the Yeerks finally demonstrate a degree of tactical competence, there's something about that scene at the quarry that just doesn't seem to add up for me. The Animorphs switch on the machine, morph, and then make small talk as they get into position, and then the bug fighter shows up. So it must have just made like a quick stop to drop off the Hork-Bajir horde, right? Now, maybe a bug fighter is big enough to hold 100 Hork-Bajir, though that's certainly not the impression that I get, but that still seems like a pretty tight window. So there must have been other ships, right? Okay, but with Tobias playing lookout up in the sky, how could he not notice more than the one ship that they were expecting approaching? Well, obviously, bug fighters have some sort of cloaking tech, right? Right. But Hork-Bajir ground troops don't. So maybe the scores of them just moved super stealthy-like to the quarry. I'll refer you again to the tight window I mentioned a few seconds ago. What if they made their approach after Tobias dive attacked the one expected Hork-Bajir? Sorry, that's an even smaller window. Oh, so the Yeerks must have gotten to the quarry super early with enough time to very carefully hide in such a way that even the eyes of a bird of prey wouldn't notice. I guess that's possible. Oh wait, no it's not, because how did the Yeerks know that they were gonna set their trap at the abandoned quarry until after they'd received the call? Look. Explanations aside, I accept that it is what happened. I mean, maybe the Yeerks just made a lucky guess. Stranger things have happened. So I'm not saying that it's impossible. But I kind of am. Alright. And lastly, as far as Visser 3 and Skipper go, it's clear that they fucking loathe each other. So I have no qualms in accepting the idea that one would release the prisoners of the other just to make the other look bad. But Skipper is Visser 1. Isn't she, like, in charge? I mean, to whom is she making Visser 3 look bad? Is it this mysterious Council of 13? Do Red Mantle and Boggles the Clue Clown really care that much about the petty squabbles of their underlings? God damn it, I love the Venture Brothers. And I'm spent. You know the drill. If you like this video, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and keep an eye out for my next exciting review of the best Animorphs book I've read so far, The Capture. I guess I'll see you then.